The grand ballroom glowed under rows of crystal chandeliers, their warm golden light reflecting off polished marble floors and tall glasses of champagne. Soft violin music floated through the air while guests laughed, chatted, and celebrated what everyone called the most beautiful wedding of the year. My sister Emily's wedding, everything was perfect. The flowers were expensive white orchids, the tables were covered in elegant silk cloth, and the guests wore designer suits and shimmering dresses. Every detail had been carefully planned to impress. Emily stood in the center of it all, glowing in a stunning white gown, smiling as people congratulated her and her wealthy fiancé. Cameras flashed around her while my parents proudly stood beside her, soaking in the admiration of everyone around them. To them, Emily was the perfect daughter, successful, elegant, respectable, the daughter they were proud to show the world. And then there was me. I stood near the back of the ballroom, hidden behind a tall pillar, trying to make myself as invisible as possible. My dress was simple compared to everyone else's, and I could already feel the judging eyes of distant relatives who hadn't seen me in years. Some of them whispered, others simply stared. Most of them probably wondered the same thing. Why was I even here? My parents had insisted I attend the wedding, though they hadn't spoken to me properly in almost a decade. Our relationship had broken the night I told them I wasn't going to law school like they wanted. My father had spent his entire life building a respected legal career, and he expected both his daughters to follow the same path. Emily obeyed. I didn't. Instead, I chose something they called reckless and embarrassing. I started a small tech company with nothing but a cheap laptop and an idea I believed in. To them, it was a childish fantasy. I still remembered my father's cold voice that night. "Stop pretending you're special," he had said. "You'll fail and come crawling back." My mother had said something even worse. "You're becoming the embarrassment of this family." And just like that, I had packed my bags and left home at 18. Years passed, but to them, I never stopped being the failure who walked away. Tonight proved that nothing had changed. As a group of guests approached my parents, one of them asked with a polite smile, "And who is that young woman over there?" I watched my mother glance toward me. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Then she turned back to them and laughed softly. "Oh, that's our other daughter," she said. There was a slight pause before she added, almost jokingly, "The one who never quite figured life out." A few guests chuckled politely. My chest tightened. I stared down at the floor, gripping my purse tightly as their laughter echoed faintly in my ears. But the worst moment of the night hadn't happened yet. And I had no idea that in just a few hours, everything in that room was about to change. The laughter from the ballroom still echoed behind me as I stepped outside into the cool night air. The heavy doors closed with a quiet thud, instantly muffling the music and voices inside. For a moment, I just stood there. The silence felt strangely comforting. A soft breeze brushed against my face, and I took a slow breath, trying to calm the tight knot in my chest. Nights like this always reminded me why I left home all those years ago. Nothing had changed. To my parents, I would always be the daughter who disappointed them, the one who refused to follow the life they had carefully planned. Inside that ballroom, Emily was the shining success story, and I was the quiet mistake standing in the corner. I pulled out my phone, thinking about calling a ride and leaving without saying goodbye. It wouldn't be the first family event I slipped away from unnoticed, but before I could open the app, my phone suddenly buzzed in my hand. A text message. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but something about it felt familiar. My heart began to beat a little faster as I opened the message. "The acquisition is finalized. Congratulations, CEO." For a second, I thought I had read it wrong. I blinked and looked again. The words were still there. My fingers trembled slightly as I scrolled down and saw the next line. Final valuation, $2, 180, 00000. The world around me seemed to freeze. 5 years ago, I had started my cybersecurity company in a tiny one-room apartment. I worked long nights surrounded by old computers, empty coffee cups, and the constant fear that everything could collapse at any moment. Back then, no one believed in me, not the investors who rejected my early proposals, not the friends who thought I was chasing an impossible dream. And definitely not my parents. I could still hear my father's voice from that last argument. You'll fail within a year. But I didn't fail. I built something real, slowly, painfully, piece by piece. New clients came, small contracts turned into bigger ones. Investors who once ignored me suddenly wanted meetings. My tiny startup grew into a company with a full office, a team of engineers, and technology powerful enough to attract global attention. And tonight, the final deal had closed, $280 million. I let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. Of all nights for this to happen, it had to be tonight, as if the universe had decided to deliver the perfect twist of fate. My phone buzzed again with another message from my business partner. Press release goes live in 20 minutes. It'll be everywhere. 20 minutes. I slowly turned and looked back through the tall glass doors of the ballroom. Inside, my parents were still smiling proudly beside Emily, completely unaware that the daughter they called a disgrace was about to become the most successful person in the entire room. And in just 20 minutes, everyone would know. I stood quietly near the back of the ballroom again, exactly where I had been before stepping outside. Nothing about the room had changed. The music was still playing softly. Guests were still laughing and celebrating. Emily was still surrounded by attention, glowing under the lights as photographers captured every perfect moment of her wedding night, and my parents were still proudly standing beside her, smiling as if they were the happiest people in the world. No one noticed me return. No one asked where I had gone. I glanced down at my phone. 15 minutes. The seconds felt strangely slow, like time itself had decided to stretch the moment. I leaned lightly against the wall, watching the crowd, wondering how different everything would feel in just a few minutes. Would anything really change, or would I still be the invisible daughter in the corner? 10 minutes passed. Then 5, my phone buzzed once in my hand. A single notification. Press release published. I lifted my eyes toward the room. At first, nothing happened. The wedding continued like normal. Then a sudden gasp broke through the noise. One of the guests near the bar stared at his phone, his eyebrows rising in surprise. A few seconds later, another guest did the same. Soon more phones began lighting up around the room like tiny stars. Whispers started spreading between tables. I watched as confusion slowly replaced the cheerful expressions on people's faces. "What is this?" Someone murmured. "Wait, isn't that?" Another guest turned his phone toward his friend, pointing at the screen. Across the ballroom, Emily's fiancé frowned as he checked his own phone. Then his eyes widened. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. That was when my father pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for several seconds. I could see the exact moment his confident expression collapsed. His smile faded, his posture stiffened. Slowly, my mother leaned closer and looked at his screen. Her hand flew up to her mouth. Around the room, the whispers were getting louder. Phones were being passed around. Heads were turning. And then someone said the words out loud. "Isn't that her?" The headline had already spread across multiple news sites. Young tech founder sells cybersecurity startup for $280 million, and just below the headline, a photo of me, standing inside my small office months ago, smiling in front of a whiteboard covered in messy code diagrams. For the first time that night, people weren't looking at me with curiosity or pity. They were staring with shock. My father slowly lifted his head. His eyes searched the room until they found me. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. Then he began walking toward me. The entire ballroom seemed to grow quiet as he approached. When he finally stopped in front of me, his voice was no longer confident. It was uncertain, almost fragile. "Is this real?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes calmly. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the one feeling small. The entire ballroom had fallen into an uncomfortable silence. Dozens of eyes were fixed on me now. The same people who had ignored me just minutes earlier suddenly looking at me like I was someone important. My father stood in front of me, still holding his phone in his hand. The screen was glowing, the headline clearly visible. His voice had lost the confidence it carried earlier during the toast. "Is this real?" he asked again quietly. I looked at the phone, then back at him. "You mean the childish dream?" I replied calmly. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Behind him, my mother slowly approached, her face pale with disbelief. She looked at me like she was seeing a completely different person than the daughter she had mocked earlier. I don't understand," she said softly. "You never told us any of this. I almost laughed at that." "Told you," I repeated gently. "You stopped listening to me a long time ago." Around us, guests were whispering again, but this time the tone was different. People were staring at their phones, reading the same headline over and over. Some were even searching my name. Across the room, Emily had noticed the growing tension. Her smile faded as she pushed through the crowd and walked toward us, her wedding dress trailing behind her. "What's going on?" she asked sharply. My father turned his phone toward her. She stared at the screen. Then she looked at me, and the expression on her face quickly changed from confusion to anger. "You couldn't even let me have one day, could you?" she snapped. "You always have to make everything about you." The accusation hung in the air. For a second, I thought about all the years I spent trying to prove I deserved a place in this family. All the times I hoped they might finally be proud of me. But standing there now, something inside me felt strangely peaceful. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was simply done. My mother stepped closer and tried to touch my arm. "We didn't realize how successful you were," she said quickly, her voice almost pleading. "Why didn't you come home and tell us?" I gently moved my arm away. "Because every time I tried," I said quietly, "you reminded me that I was the family disgrace." My father lowered his eyes. For the first time in my life, he looked like he didn't know what to say. The room remained silent. Even the music had stopped. I picked up my purse and turned toward the exit again. But before walking away, I paused and looked back at them one last time. "Oh, and Dad," I said. He slowly lifted his head. A small, calm smile appeared on my face. "I didn't turn out the way you hoped." I took a step toward the door. I turned out exactly the way I planned, and with that, I walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the people who once called me a disgrace. Because the truth was proving them wrong, was the sweetest revenge of all.